please join me in welcoming Jimenez Live.
Thank you. I just feel like using a microphone would take the pressure off of projecting. Can you all hear me okay? Thank you, Ryan, for the wonderful introduction. If I got nothing else out of teaching at USC, I got to meet Ryan Martinez. So this is the show. I don't want no retrospective. Of course, for those of you, by the way, some of you may have been to my very recent 2 weeks ago SciArc lecture, and some of you may have gone to my job talk from a year ago. I have done my best to not do the same things. Now, I cannot reinvent my entire body of work in 2 weeks. So, in a bit, I'll talk about the structure of this talk, and those of you, again, that if you've seen it, you'll see some repeats, but it's going to be a super speed run, okay? Super speed run. So buckle down your seatbelt, get down Mount 5 on the highway. We're going to do this super speed run. I don't want no retrospective. It was a painting by Ed Ruscha. I think why I was drawn to this title is when Ed Ruscha humorously made this painting, he was on one. Obviously, he's done a lot of retrospectives, but it's on the one hand a resistance to closure. On the other, it's a suspicion of institutional framing, both of which I share. Right, I resist closure, and I am suspicious of institutional framing. But I don't want no retrospective. If you read the blurb on the exhibition, I make this argument that not every contract yields in buildings, right? Not every contract yields in buildings, but every contract yields in models, drawings, sometimes videos, text. It's almost to a point where I wonder if architecture is a byproduct of our day-to-day. And I also wonder if the medium of what we do as architects is not necessarily the building, but these kinds of outputs, the variety of outputs, rendering us almost as multimedia production people, cultural productionists then. And sometimes, every now and then, sometimes once a year, once every 5 years, I don't know, if you're lucky, every now and then you do get a building, right? Okay, so here's the speed run structure. I'm going to make a very extensive introduction about myself. I'll talk about my teaching work and some of my teaching work, very abridged, and my build work and drawing work. But the point of this lecture, really, I'm staring at both West Jones and their page because I'm currently working on an essay, and I would love to hear your thoughts, all of your thoughts. Okay, it just so happens that so for some of the people who dedicated their entire careers into Los Angeles, I've recently come to a revelation and a new reading because of another text, which I'll talk about. Okay, and I'm looking forward to hearing your responses. That's the work in progress essay that I'm sharing some slides today, and ending with a very brief epilogue. Not the same epilogue. I'm not doing the Wang Wilshire. If you've seen Wang Wilshire, I'm not doing it today. Okay. There are two ways for you to. Okay, again, this is going to be super speed run. There are two ways for you to read my work. One is cartoons about architecture, where the medium is cartoon and the subject matter is architecture. I use cartoons to talk about architecture. The second way is cartoonish architecture, right? Where the medium is architecture, but the sensibility is cartoonish, all right? And throughout this talk, you'll see both re-emerging once again. And by doing a lot of this, as Ryan mentioned, I've had the great fortune of being exhibited and collected by the Art Institute of Chicago, LACMA, SF MoMA, and MoMA. I've also even caught one of the last trains to MoMA PS1, and did the Architecture League Prize, won the Designer of the Future Award with Art Basel, and along the way did a lot of publications, and I think one of the highlights of my life really was being able to represent Taiwan at the Venice Biennale. And thus is the path of Eurospectacular. Here's where I would have said something about where I come from. Toronto, the school was super raw to a point where we got to experiment a lot, do a lot of these kinds of large, oversized nonsense. I spent some time at Taliesin West. I went to work at Atelier de Lisa. By the way, Scott also worked here at different times, but same shipping container people. I lived in one of these shipping containers and worked on this gigantic rectum. It was called the rectum bar. The instruction was warts and all. Spent some time at OMA, New York, and Rotterdam. And I got to start teaching quite young. I think I might have been 28 or something, 27. And all that's left from my schoolwork. By the way, files do corrupt, so if you want to double up, that's a good idea. All I have left is this one file from my entire school career, which is okay. So my thesis was a work of science fiction on the post-teleportation world, right? The architecture and urbanism of the post-teleportation world. If you are able to teleport, there will be no transitional spaces, no corridors, no airports, no seaports, no highways, roads, and all this infrastructure that we've dedicated over the centuries. What happens now, and what happens to time, space, time zone, geography, all these things. Where do you want to work? How do you get to places? But this science fiction carried with me. Again, I'm doing a speed run. I would have talked about the Broadacre City with Frank Lloyd Wright, but I thought that Broadacre City was a pretty bad idea in its never-ending expansiveness. So I thought it would be a good idea to package it into a spaceship and shoot it into space, where the boundary of the spaceship would be the envelope that prevents the urbanism from ever expanding, right? We're talking about a phalanx theory. For those of you who are familiar with the work of Charles Fourier, a French philosopher from the late 1800s, he was talking about the phalanx theory, a city inside of a building, right? A city inside of a building. And he was extremely specific about the number of people who would live inside of the city and the type of organizations. I was thinking, inside of this never-expanding city, this city inside of a building, what would life be like without gravity? What would life be like without year? Like, the calendar wouldn't make sense to these people, right? Where the hours of the clock would not make sense to these people without the sun, without the moon. And what happens to ritual, language, and all these things. Lucky for me, in 2008, at Materials and Applications, I got to construct one of these gravity-resistant rooms where the room rotated once an hour. Every 15 minutes, and the plan would become an elevation, and elevation becomes a ceiling plan, and every 7.5 minutes, you get to experience life on the oblique. Some of you may recognize Oliver, rest in peace. Jenna. It wasn't just about gravity or spaceship, it was also about both teleportation and time travel. So here, one of the members of a spaceship returned to Earth and encounters this individual where, I guess, this is a future archaeologist, asked him about, because I guess this person space worked and had been gone from Earth for 10,000 years. And imagine the thrill of a future archaeologist meeting a live specimen from 10,000 years ago. He has so many questions, and his anthropological thesis was on the average case of the early 21st century, which would be roughly this. And his first question was, my first question was architecture this or that? He said, I can't figure it out. According to every academic record, architecture was somewhere here. But according to every archaeological dig, every single archaeological dig, it is as though the built environment had very little to do with the academic records. So to conclude my first question, can you tell me what might have caused this divergence? The guy says, oh no, everyone's dead. Because I don't have to pay my taxes anymore. Should redeem my Costco points. I got to take this future archaeology idea, and I was invited by the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul, South Korea, to commemorate the death of the last king of Korea. He had died in 1919, so this invitation came in 2019 for his centennial anniversary. And the title of the exhibition was called Unearthing Futures. I got to be thinking, our relationship with archaeology is a relationship with down, right? This vector of down, you dig, right? Every time you dig, you find paths in time, which also means that, this inverse relationship upwards would be, I guess, the datum of the future. Case in point, the Roman Forum, roughly 2,000 years ago, was buried about 6 meters underground. And I was thinking, 6 meters above ground would be the datum from the vantage point of 2,000 years later, assuming they also excavate the palace of the last king of Korea. Again, I'm doing a super speed run. Some of the stories that works of science fiction were about sustainability, and others were about reflections on COVID, effects of isolation and COVID. Right. This one wasn't a graphic novel or anything. It was straight up a short story published by Eflux. I highly recommend or encourage you, invite you to read it if you want. It wasn't just science fiction. I was also thinking about the distinction between science fiction and political fiction. Every time we document the world, right, try as we might to do objective journalism, we can't. We can't, okay? Because, some errors will be made, some, let's say, inconsistencies would become, let's say, misreadings or rereadings of the world that we live in. And when we got to redraw downtown Los Angeles, we also thought, is there a way for us to document what was happening in downtown at this time, and maybe place a statement or emphasis on our reflections of the political state, right? So because right after the murder of George Floyd, people took it to the streets, right? People did not take it to Pershing Square. People took it to the streets. It means that the vehicular infrastructure doubled as civic infrastructure. And Pershing Square, as a work of civic infrastructure, was left alone, untouched, right? Similarly, this was a time of COVID. We were really thinking about the sudden drop of occupancy level of what I guess, everywhere else in the world would call this CBD, Central Business District. But, as it dropped, below, at times below 50%, we're thinking, is there a way for us to rearrange the solid void relationship of the occupied versus the not occupied, and exercise a state of emergency and maybe suspend the strictness of activities, programmatic activities assigned, right? Can we not do C2 and maybe do certain other things in these pockets of voids? Or in this case, for those of you who have been to downtown Los Angeles, you would know about the very literal wealth gap. There are people who are living on the streets versus the people who are able to access the roof bars, rooftop terraces, and so forth. Here, we did not design anything to simply turn off the middle, right? This act of mass decapitation revealed that the city is but a flying fleet of antisocial spaceship, a collapsed geography of people who have and who have not. The work of the work of political fiction also dealt with other things that are not just political, but also economic and about economics, right? So here, a person is hacking and he's saying goodbye to his spouse, getting into an elevator, meeting a scientist in a lab coat. It's a very, very long elevator ride. So they got to a long conversation about tall buildings at the beginning of the 21st century. They were talking about Burj Khalifa, right? Remember in 2009 when Burj Khalifa was completed, people were asking, how high can we go? It was about 800 meters, right? How high can we go? Where would it be, and what would it look like? In this reality, the question of how high can we go is answered by when we run out of air, which is roughly 12 kilometers into the sky. So here you can faintly make out the skyline of Manhattan, because this building is the extrusion of Central Park for 12 kilometers. It has capacity for roughly 87, 88 million people, which is roughly the size of Germany. Imagine, no longer a city inside of a building, but an economic and political state inside of a building, where it reverses the figure ground condition of Manhattan. It reverses zoning into section, from plan to section, as well as sectional typologies, housing typologies to reflect cloud conditions. They get to the top of the building, and the scientist in the lab coat says, as you know, it is physically impossible to live this high. Your assignment is to stay here for a year. Stay here for a year, because if you survive, we're going to keep building. I'm going to highlight this moment right here where I struggle to figure out whether or not the speech bubble should go over or under, but because this is going to come back, okay? For those of you who have drawn cartoons, you have dealt with this. Wes, have you dealt with this? Should go under or over? Anyway, this will come back. Just like the rotating room or the future archaeologist platform, from the tall building project, I also got to extract this, find an escape velocity and build something. This project was called the Briefcase House. Around the time of the economic crisis of 2008, I found a really cheap former warehouse in Chicago, and I was able to basically do the math and figure out that I can afford to build a house instead of a warehouse, a building instead of a building, quite affordably. And this was the beginning of Bureau Spectacular. So I lived here, right? When I taught in Chicago, I lived here for roughly, say 5-6 years. That was my cat, Helvetica. Rip. Let me say some of the interior shots. When I finished this, some friends come over, they were saying, "Oh, cool, Jimenez, did you just do architecture?" And I said, "No, it was too small to be architecture, but too big to be furniture. A super furniture. A super furniture." Thus began a scale of projects that we worked on in the student office, including the first retail store we did in LA. Another super furniture, an exploding staircase, which became an audience space, but also a performance space. And the conventional retail components, such as fitting room, display cases, checkout counters, were all embedded into this staircase as it explodes. Right? Along the way, we also got to work with, using the scale of the super furniture, work with super interesting clients and institutions here in LA or outside of, and eventually it got us to Coachella. I also want to say, this whole idea of cartoonish architecture really did make it here, right? It wasn't just the stories about architecture, but the graphic qualities of cartoons that eventually becomes the building, right? I am happy to report that I started doing buildings, like let's say ground up construction, right? So the Slaughterhouse was a project that I worked on. A neighbor that I met while walking my dog asked if since I do architecture, can I draft, like do AutoCAD or something, because he had a very cheap plot of land that he needed. I was like, oh, I can do more than draft, we can make something special for you. So he's like, please, no, I want a stupid, cheap stucco box, a box. I want a box, 2,000 square feet, and I want 6 bedrooms. Insane, right? Like up to this point, you're thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do? So indeed, we delivered a boring stucco box, but it wasn't. But we were looking for design opportunities within this kind of world of the box, right? So first, we subdivided the box into 2 halves and found that we can concentrate the private strip and I guess 2 private strips and 2 public strips. Like a drawing strip of the Belgian/French style of Bandé Designé, these kinds of cartoon strips, we thought was a really good way of thinking about programmatic registration. But we didn't end there. The deconstruction of the strips extended to interior elevations, because what better ways of understanding slices of life than interior elevations, where traces of entry and exit, where traces of privacy are completely registered. We slotted and I guess reconstructed the strip back together into the stucco box. It wasn't just a diagram of privacy or program, but because it also became a way of organizing structure and plumbing, right? Obviously, the shear wall would be the most obvious place to put plumbing, and we were also calling these the fishbone diagrams, right? The fishbone diagrams became a way for us to think about the contents of this stucco box. We delivered a inexpensive stucco box. I have to say I learned a lot about CA, and hopefully next time will be better. Another residential project I've been working on for the last almost 2 years now is this project called Set Theory. This is the massing of Set Theory, also roughly 2,000 square feet in Arizona. Again, coming back to the cartoon stuff, right? For those of you who have drawn cartoons, remember I was struggling to think about whether the speech bubble should go over or under the frame, or should the human subject go over the speech bubble or under? This graphic hierarchy is not just a conundrum; it's a math problem called set theory, right? Set theory. So as a field of study within math, we now know at the very minimum there are 16 outcomes when 2 geometries meet. Okay. And we were thinking, can we superimpose the geometries and figure out a way where between the two levels, maybe material changes, maybe space changes, maybe occupation changes. We also had an opportunity to think about, let's say, quote unquote, funny drawings. I don't know about the rest of you. My life is a bit of a mess. I don't eat where I'm supposed to. I don't sleep where I'm supposed to. I don't work where I'm supposed to. Sometimes I'm eating from bed. Okay, so the promise of the solid color programmatic distribution where red is something, blue is something, right? Yellow is where you go back and forth. I don't know what. I'm so sorry. My life is a blurry gradient mess. There's no way that a single color will define what I do in the house. Well, as I attended some of these comic book, graphic novel conferences where departments of English and literature were talking very seriously about the medium of cartoon, I came to learn that they don't talk about cartoons, they talk about text and image composition as a form of human literature, right? Text and image composition, just like the construction document. And I was wondering if I were to remove the architecture where only the text remains, can I, through the density of dimensions, find the massing of my project? This project, we're finished with the construction document, and hopefully this thing comes put together soon. Very recently, about a month and a half ago, I entered a competition in Czechia using the same diagram, but thinking about it at a slightly larger scale, and thinking about the kind of effects of these superpositions, right? If I were to superimpose this way, what happens to these slivers of leftover awkward geometries? What happens if the superimposition is a superimposition of not just geometries, but typologies, right? And these kinds of leftover spaces also begs the question, if we were to reread Figures, Doors, and Passages by Robin Evans, what awkwardness and in-between zones will yield in these kinds of shared, public, neighborly experiences of cooking together, doing laundry together, finding each other through the gaps, seeing each other, and doing nothing together, right? This is the ground level where we propose this playscape. I have to say, doing these competitions, you usually lose. But this time, because of the transparency of the Czech system, we found out that until the very last moment, we stayed in the conversation, right? It gives me a boost of confidence, thinking that this is maybe not for naught. I just have to keep going. I also have been doing some adaptive reuse here in LA. This is a sort of dilapidating warehouse that the client wanted to convert into what do you call that? Office, right? Adaptive reuse. And we were thinking, can we take this strip idea once more and unroll the elevation facade and think about these kinds of inside-outside experiences where these kinds of frames are framing each other between inside and outside? Can parking potentially take on other properties other than just parking? Can they take on some social properties, right? Ryan Martinez took these shots. Thank you, Ryan. Wonderful shots. I've not just begun to make some buildings, but we've also continued to do some installation art. Art Oh My, Ryan also spent some time here. It's a organization in upstate New York, about 2.5 hours north of Manhattan. I highly recommend the visit. What a wonderful place. It's the curator's name is Julia Lindenhout. I am an admirer of hers. She invited me over to look at the site and said to me, can you do something very special? Oh, but also we have no budget. Very familiar story. How little budget, I asked. She gave me a number. It indeed was super low, but on my way out, after driving to this place, I encountered this precast concrete shop, and I was thinking, if I were to collect the catalog of this concrete shop, where they sold septic tanks, staircases, and catch basins, can I stack it together and make some type of creature out of the found objects? I'm very lucky that I work with Matthew Malnick. He's a structural engineer here in Los Angeles. He's one of my favorite. It turned out to be one of my favorite people in the world. You don't hear that every day, that you're a structural engineer is one of your favorite people in the world. Matthew Malnick has that effect on people. And he saw my somewhat conservative stacking of a model and nudged over one of the boxes and looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Live a little." My structural engineer told me to live a little. And these are 4 things that I'm paraphrasing that he said to me. Right? Indeed, we lived a little. If later on you want to ask about the precariousness of the tilting structure, we calculated it. We can talk about it. We can also even talk about contrapposto. We inherited these angles from the catch basins, since the tapering angles were really good for retention of fluid. But for us, right, it became a way of creating posture, body posture, structurally. When this project was finished, I was in the midst of thinking about another competition entry. With this one, we didn't come close, but I stared deeply into this thing. I was thinking, P is for plumbing, right? Like an MEP. P is for plumbing. Like all these things are plumbing. Because what if the core was stupid? What if the core was so stupid that it didn't just do MEP or transportation or structure? It incorporated other things. And what if the stupid cores coexisted inside the normal box, like as normal as an unarticulated volume, empty volume? Because the push, expansive and contractive qualities of the stupid cores will create these, interesting sectional spaces, probably. If you're finding this photograph familiar, it's because you entered the same competition. There are about 1,500 people that enter this competition. So, but this competition that we lost is amongst the many projects that almost could have been. Partially why I say something along the lines of, the building is almost a byproduct of all these things that we do. I no longer view these kinds of in-progress work as a lost cause. In fact, I've used these as the primary medium. And I look forward to more opportunities for these buildings to come through in the process, including this. Hopefully, in a few months, maybe in the next semester when we meet again, I'll be able to talk about this floating theater in Mexico. It's under construction document. And just because we do these kinds of in-between work, sometimes I wonder if we're as good as sculptors, doing a lot of these like installation art. Sometimes I wonder also, do these installation art tell us more about, help us work through experimental or conceptual thoughts, right? Am I thinking about monsters? I am. I'm always thinking about monsters, creatures, characters, caricatures. Sometimes they're 2D, sometimes they're 3D. Sometimes you can sit on them, and other times they're virtual. And I guess these kinds of studies of monsters and characters are long-term reflections on conversations that happened over 50 years ago, and conversations with people like Venturi Scott Brown, who are very literal about what a duck is, or John Haydock, who was not literal at all, and quite mysterious about whether or not these are characters, monsters, creatures, caricatures, archetypes, or what. And a lot of these drawings and studies along the way are continuous meditations, including the White Elephant Project that was collected by the Museum of Modern Art. Continuous meditations as to what proportions do to the reading of a thing. Right? Even Coachella, our Tower of 12 Story project, was one of these monster character studies, right? And because of my relationship with Matthew Melnick, I also got to really think that posture is a structural problem. Right? Contrapposto means that this is the load-bearing member, and that is not the load-bearing member. And how do you do a thing where things are crooked? Like if the columns are crooked, if they're more like tripods, the sloppiness of the thing is actually requires so much design and so much structural knowledge for it to look like this, right? More recently, we completed this ugly monster inside of a corporate office, lobby space of a corporate office. How do you take these almost faces, almost places, and turn them into both a drawing exercise, but also a spatial kind of partial spatial exercise. All right, I'm speed running, and I got a little more time. I would have, I'm not going to talk about Zoom stuff. It's not that interesting anymore. It is interesting. It is interesting when you judge somebody on Zoom. I think, right, when you're somebody's background, they're so careless about their backdrop that you automatically don't trust them. Um, I think this idea of the moving medium, I guess our relationship with distant communication. I started doing YouTube. I went on a hiatus. I'm about to get back into it. And please like, share, and subscribe. But how fortunate am I to be working here? Teaching here, meeting Ryan Martinez, meeting Aaron Casimo, and this year working with Andy Crew and all these students. I guess the studies of the monsters, for me anyway, every time I think about these kinds of full resolution studies, we are hopefully taking chances, right? Taking chances, living a little structurally, right? Hopefully, we are taking chances to think about socially what types of platforms we produce. How do we, in person, within 2 months, we got here to be, really testing the boundaries of how space could affect behavior, or how space could affect reading of the thing, and how proportions are so sensitive. And once we build it, we can understand, a matter of 18 inches or 15 inches would be a huge difference as to how we behave between one another. I also got to meet wonderful students during thesis, undergrad, and grad. And these are just, what a blast. 2 years ago, Jose and I even started thinking about what AI could do with archaeology. Where Jen here just wanted to draw and daydream all day. And, what a pleasure. Isabella and Dawn asked the weirdest questions. And it's only in the platform of teaching am I able to have these day-to-day conversations, which I cherish, which I really cherish. And now we're making these kinds of larger models with my second-year undergrads. Some of them are here. All right, now to the heart of the matter. This is what I've been preparing for. I'm working on an essay. The working title of this essay is called The Aesthetics of Rawness. Okay, The Aesthetics of Rawness. And what am I talking about? There are two Los Angeleses, okay? By my observation, by living here for over however long I've been living here, I'm making two very reductive and broad stroke observations, and I want to share them with you. And I want to talk about, I guess, people who reveal, right? An LA that reveals, right? You don't just reveal in your drawings. You want the tectonics to be in the foreground of how people approach the project. And in fact, you really want to express the tectonics in such a way where even if you were to conceal somewhat, we're talking about West, we're talking about fossils, Michael Rotundi, Erico Moss, the expression of tectonics, right? There's a Los Angeles that does this really, really well, better than anybody. That is almost the focus of the work, and Dwayne and Jenny are not young anymore, but they've been doing this. They've been asking this question too. Alvin has been asking this question. Ali DG has been asking this question, and even people like Frank Gehry. And Frank Gehry is a really interesting case because it's somebody who does both, reveal and conceal, and we're going to get to that. Okay, but before we get to that, pamphlet 12, such an important text to so many of us in my generation anyway. Right? Like I think you have to understand, there was a time when I was a student, only two names exemplified experimentation. It was Wes Jones and Neil Bernard, and that's it. Okay, there was a time. And, of course, sure, people also looked at OMA, people also looked at, every other offices, but, the notion of true experimentation, under pamphlet number 12, which you can probably find in the library. I highly encourage you to check it out. But, here, Robert McCarter wrote this, right? And one of the most revealing ironies, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but there's this idea of the machine aesthetics, right? And I think back to where all this may have come from, and I wonder about the role that Cedric Price played on the careers of Richard Rogers and Norman Foster, or perhaps, by extension, Cole Penderglaub. In Europe, in the United Kingdom, in Central Europe, over here in Austria, the idea of I guess, in the case of Cedric Price, where he was talking about the Fun Palace, the kind of space frame, futuristic expression of the guts and like what's under the hood, right? What's under the hood becomes the facade. And I wonder, maybe in our case, but in Japan's case, by the way, some of you may not know Hiroshi Hara, a legend in Japan. I had the great fortune of meeting him. In fact, I had the great fortune of being on his final review, like his final teaching studio. I got to be on his review. Hiroshi Hara, he was a Japanese legend. This is the Kyoto train station. If you ever go to Kyoto, this is where you likely get out of. And I have to say, encountering this building, and this is like a personal note, right? This is like outside the essay right now. This is a personal note. I was in my early 20s. I did not want to do architecture yet, but encountering this building had that kind of impact on me. I was thinking it might not be a bad idea to do architecture. And the work I was studying art history at my major was art history at the time, and the work that came to mind for me was a Robo-Pomo cathedral of MechTech cathedral with economic activities instead of this infrastructure, this train station, Robo-Pomo cathedral, Robo-Pomo MechTech cathedral. And this Robo-Pomo MechTech cathedral I found in Los Angeles too, right? Like the signage in itself. I guess, and I also was wondering, I was having lunch with Michael Rotundi and asking how Los Angeles, by and large, escaped postmodernism, right? How this entire city, yeah, okay, fine, Charles Moore was here, but by and large, right, escaped postmodernism. And our expression of postmodernism had to be MechTech, right? Had to be this kind of expression of tectonics. To this point, you might be wondering, okay, I did drop the name of Neil Bernari, but why am I not including him in the reveal category, right? These are Neil's drawings, also super impactful to many of us in my generation. And this is the HL21, or 23, HL23, okay, on Highline, right, on the Highline. Some of you may know Neil Bernari, and some of you may have even gone to lectures by Neil Bernari, where he, and I quote, he uses the words, and I quote, sleight of hand. Have you heard Neil Bernari use the words sleight of hand? He says sleight of hand in the management of structures, right? He's saying, can I do it in such a way where a viewer of this building may not know if the choice is a graphic one or a structural one? Implying that he's attempting to conceal through the reveal, right? And I also have to look back to issue number 5. This is deep in the weeds, but I'm saying all this, if you're taking notes, go check out these publications. Log number 5 is super important, especially to LA. Bob Somo was here at the time in Los Angeles, right? And Bob, along with Sarah Whiting, Bob Somo, along with Sarah Whiting, they were, for the first time in the short history of Log to this point, Log issue number 5 was edited by someone else other than Cynthia Davidson, right? And this was an opportunity for Cynthia to, let's say, give Bob Somo and Sarah Whiting to answer for themselves for writing notes on the Doppler effect. I know this is super old stuff, and a lot of you don't know these things. But you just have to imagine, Notes on Doppler Effect, an essay written by Sarah Whiting and Bob Somo, was one of those paradigm-shifting, tectonic plate-shattering episodes in architectural discipline, where they openly challenged the discourse of Peter Eisenman, and they openly described Peter Eisenman's career as quote-unquote critical and non-projective, right? And this idea of the projective within Bob Somo's own writing, between 12 Reasons to Get Back into Shape and Green Dot 101, I'm just going to kind of abridge all of this into a word, which is singularity. That word is singularity. How can you make a building look like a monolithic singular object instead of the makeup of multiple objects, right? That was Bob Somo's question. Because he was looking at this proposal by Northing's Redeye Architects, singularity. This project by Ome, the Casa de Musica concert hall in Porto, a singularity, right? It's not so much the material is monolithic. You can totally see the seams, but the challenge is to make it read as though it's singular, right? And therefore, structure is concealed. Here in the United States, I would also think of Marlon Blackwell's work as somebody who does singularity and structure is concealed, right? I'm coming back to this, right? There's an LA that reveals, and then there's an LA that conceals. Somewhere along the line, maybe starting with Michael Malton, maybe earlier, but definitely with Michael Malton, there's an effort to conceal, right? Lorcan conceals, in fact, Barbara Bester was here recently, and she even said the words, during her lecture, I like to hide. She said that. Johnson Markley conceals. First Office, a slightly younger office, conceals, right? Their proposal for PS1, this thing would look like a monolith, but it would have been constructed out of wood, right? Ben Horowitz conceals. Jeff Kaplan, for those of you who don't know who he is, in my generation, and I hate to sound this way, but he might be the best architect in my generation. Do you guys know him? He might be. He's so great. I put myself in the category of conceal, right? I'm probably here, even though I have this propensity and interest in both. I think both are equally interesting and important, but maybe because of my mentorship and experience, I landed in the conceal world. More recently, Log 62. I still got a little bit of time. Log 62. Emma Zeidman wrote this piece called Neobrutalism, where he's celebrating the work of Lacan Vassal, KGDBS, and Jan de Wilder, right? And he's also kind of thinking about some more contemporary LA practices like current interest, people who reveal once more. Like there's a generational skip up to maybe First Office, and some of the newer, Freelandbach is not super new, but there's a I guess group of people that reveal once more. And I also got to thinking, the idea of reveal is not just the construction process, but the drawing process, revealing the drawing, right? And to a point where Brian Cantley, Perry Culper, maybe these are their ways of revealing. And I wonder if Hans Tersek's digital work is his own way of revealing, right? An LA that conceals versus LA that reveals. But this is my biggest problem. This is a quote, a direct quote, that I extracted out of his text by M. Zeifel. You can read it on your own, and I highlighted my issue. He claims that there's an ethical motivation to the idea of reveal, material assembly. That just cannot be. That just cannot be. And the point of this essay that I'm working on now is to produce a rebuttal. There's no way that one can argue that there's a moral high ground to working on work that reveals instead of conceal. I show this juxtaposition between Vincent van Gogh, where every brushstroke is revealed, versus, in this case, none of the brushstrokes can be seen. All right, I'm just going to skip the epilogue. There's no point in talking about the epilogue. I just want to end right here. And I look forward to if we have time for a brief discussion. Thank you.
No, I have a simple question. In your mind, what are the ethics of conceal?
Right. No, it's good. It's why it's a work in progress. I'm working out these things right now too, right? I don't think there is one. I don't think there's an ethics in either. In fact, it's so unethical to call one of them ethical.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
No, I wonder in this case whether it's just a question of terminology here. Because obviously the word conceal brings with it intentions and stuff that are what shade it into a kind of moral arena of reckoning. But realistically, as this is demonstrating here, it's not really a question of concealment, which implies some intent. It's just a different medium for producing the work and what's important in the work. And so, I have to say in, 511, I harsh on Gary a lot for, let's say, the way the Disney concert hall hides 18 different layers of steel in order to produce the effect in the end. But I do that within the context of the class when we're trying to learn about how you make stuff, right? But ultimately, the intention he is engaging there is not to hide the steel. The steel is just a means to get to the ultimate form.
Yeah.
And so I wonder whether, you're not trying to precipitate an argument by using that term, rather than coming up with just a different term to describe, the difference between, let's say, the surface orientation of the thing and the means to produce that surface.
Yeah. So a conversation that I've had a few times with UCLA professor Michael Osmond was about drywall, right? If a drywall, we were just talking about this in the studio the other day, right? Actually, everyone did a pretty good job. But if you see a bump on the wall, right, it would mean that you noticed poor craftsmanship. It's only in nothing when you it's only in nothing when you realize that there's high craftsmanship. And because there's nothing, you might even ignore it or overlook it, right? Not trying to say that there's a more. I need to formulate a way of saying that I'm a fan of both approaches. I think my answer how about earlier was I just think it's unethical to call one of them ethical.
As opposed to the
Yeah,
other.
yeah, that's right.
To select.
That's right.
Right, so I think you would just need to make more of a case that there is a certain group of people, like maybe Emmett, who are,
By the way, you're in that issue.
I know.
64.
Applying ethical standards and implications and assumptions to the difference between, what our generation would understand as a WYSIWYG approach to it, and another generation's or another approach which is just the form, the thing, what you see. And how that comes to be is not part of the interest or message, which doesn't necessarily automatically imply that those means are being hidden for a reason, So again, it feels like maybe the opposition is not, you're reading more into the difference than maybe is intended. Which is not to say that that reading may not be appropriate. It may actually tease out, underlying assumptions or feelings that were not even apparent to the practitioners at the time.
Let me just add that, and I agree with that point, but it may be also an issue of preference and the author's intent, meaning that in some cases the aspiration is to foreground or highlight, let's say, the form or the compositional attributes of the assembly or composition, to maybe in your case at Coachella have that cartoon-like reading, versus if let's say you went behind it and everything was revealed, it's a both and thing. And one of the things that made me think about was actually your and Michelle's presentation of the project that was selected, and on how by exposing a lot of the details and pieces and parts, the spatial form, the internal spatial form, I would say, is not as legible. It's more a dialogue, let's say, between the pieces, the parts, the structure, what's existing, what's been removed, versus, let's say, someone in a more extreme example, like Ando, for instance, who on one hand is revealing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because the concrete is the structure and the shell,
Yeah.
but at the same time, he's presencing some of the properties of space and light, which I know to be a part of his intent and aspiration.
Thanks, Jimenez. In seeing this, I think about Mies van der Rohe when he was younger and working as an apprentice.
He
He
did
was
bricks.
doing,
Yeah.
he's with his dad. He was doing masonry, but then he was working on plaster ornamentation after that, right? And doing that, and then in a way he rejected those plaster ornaments to say, I want to reveal this steel structure. I want to show it. But ironically, in that also was a master of concealing so much through the work. In the Barcelona Pavilion is a
Yeah.
great example.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if it's the choices about what is concealed or revealed versus whether it's concealing or revealing, because I think all of the projects in some way are choosing to conceal something.
Could we just say making visible rather than concealing?
It's the same,
Would that-
yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it has to have that, carry that, that weight of the it's what you show, what you choose to show, what you ultimately choose to show.
And I think this is productive in maybe making visible, right? Versus just saying making visible. I wonder if it's the scales of legibility, right? Like I think at a certain scale, like Casa de Misca, for example, the whole needed to be legible, and therefore, if the articulation of the tectonics were somewhere in this hole, that tectonic would not be legible, right? And I wonder if that, but in either cases, I think, arguing about this, I like thinking about these kinds of nuanced differences, details within architecture, right? Like these are approaches within architecture. I guess I'm just really trying to work out, a way of saying sensibility cannot be ethics. These are sensibilities. They're not ethics. And for Emmett Zivan to call it ethics, I find us so dubious.
Yeah, so,
I mean, by the way, I like Emmett. He's a really nice guy. I really do like him. But I just I have to respond to this essay.
yeah, well, that's very interesting. I also find it interesting that there was a moment when you were talking about your own influences where you showed what you call mecta.
Right.
All the early,
The Hara
West.
stuff.
and Neil Denari and all of that is valorizing the guts. Whether they're the real guts or not is another conversation, but they're valorizing the idea of the guts, right? Versus the smoothness you're
Yeah.
showing at, right?
And I think maybe this is like revealing in a different way. Like that whole approach was too hard for me.
Too many lines.
Yes. And once I encountered the foam cutter, architecture became suddenly very easy. One, two.
Question about for you, like what ethics means, because I think like that comparison between like the vernacular and I guess the comparison that you had in the comic, when the archaeologist is asking like institutional architecture versus the actual built environment, and my question is, with revealing or not revealing, is that dubious to this type of aesthetic movement that we like? Or if we're thinking about, like, as architects, the responsibility that we have in the built environment, like, there's a reason for drywall, there's a reason for the space that's created within, like, light stuff framing. But if we were to reveal that,
would that be unethical to the actual inhabitants that we're creating?
Thank you so much, George. I think no, I really needed this intervention to work out these ideas. It was really super helpful. Thank you. I think I really also want to say that liking something should be innocent. You know, I think liking whatever you want to like should be innocent. It should not be described as ethical or unethical. Yeah, that's it. I want to, like, where do my ethics, what's my sort of like moral compass, where's my moral compass? I like it when people get to like what they like. And if someone were to be told that they cannot like what they like, that's unethical.
Is it therefore allowed for you to try to talk people into liking something? Is it allowed to judge things as better or worse, than if all preference is good or okay?
Yeah.
What's the point of trying to educate people into some things are better than other things?
And I think the onus then is on us, right, the people who teach, to articulate our preferences without necessarily applying moral high ground.
But there's still reasons,
Yeah.
right? There's
Yeah.
still logic and reasons
Yeah.
and backup.
Yes.
You still bring backup to
That's
the
right. Yeah.
conversation. Yeah.
And I think, sorry, just super quickly, I think at the same time that I was